I'd like to welcome everybody for joining me today. Thank everybody for joining me and welcoming them to exploring the influence, trends, and education of the Hispanic and Latinx community in American philanthropy. I know that you have a lot of places you could be spending your time, so I appreciate you spending the next hour with me. I will be going through the webinar, and if I can ask that if you have any questions, you could put them in the Q&A or the chat box. I will try to get to them at the end. I will also allow anybody who wants to raise their hand at the end to come live and ask any questions on the webinar. I'm Anthony Alonso. I am president and co-founder of Catapult Fundraising. I am also Latino. That's why I'm speaking on this topic. It's a topic very near and dear to my heart. Catapult Fundraising is a full-service fundraising consulting firm. We do everything from capital campaigns, major gift programs, to very highly personalized telephone outreach programs for planned giving, annual giving, and mid-level donors. So we have a full array and suite of services that we offer. Most of our clients range from universities to healthcare to social service agencies, and a couple of arts organizations as well. So welcome. I will move on to the first slide here, and it's a slide I start with on this presentation because it's a story about my mom. I am Latino. I was raised in Newark, New Jersey by a single mom. And as you can see here, there's my mom, who I consider my hero. And what you see on the right is a picture of my mom giving her son a kiss when I received the Outstanding Fundraising Professional Award from AFP, which to me was the highlight of my career thus far. And there's my mom celebrating with me, who is my hero and has always been my hero, and the reason that I am where I am today. But here's a question that she still asks 35 years after I joined this profession. And people give? And that's a question that's often asked by Latinos, right? People give, you call them and people give, you ask them for money and people give. And part of that, as I explored this, and it was a topic that I found to be fascinating, is because we as a fundraising community have not done enough to educate the Latino market. And it's important that we are doing things to educate the market on the importance of giving. And I'll tell you why. Because 80% of Latinos and Hispanics gave to the church last year. 80%. They don't see that as philanthropy. See, I grew up with a mom who, for all my life, has been going to church every Sunday and giving to the church every Sunday, but she does not see that as philanthropy. I grew up with a mom that sends money back to her family, all right, in our country. She doesn't see that as philanthropy. That's philanthropy. And most Latinos give to the church, go to church and give every week, or they send money back to their countries, which are huge forms of philanthropy. Obviously, I don't want to negate that there are not other Latinos that give to other causes, but the vast majority of Latinos give to the church and also send back to their country, right? And so what does that look like in terms of real giving? When I explored the topic a little further, on average, Latinos gave $1,728 to their church last year. They're giving it on a weekly basis, and so they don't see it as this large of a group, large of a dollar amount. But I felt that this number was important for us all to think about. $1,728 per year. If we were looking at that at our own shops and thinking of an average gift of $1,728, we'd be thinking of that person as a mid-level donor at least, and someone with major gift potential, someone that has the capability to be in the pipeline for a major gift. But we don't look at it that way when it comes to the Latino market for a variety of reasons, and I'll explore some of those reasons as we get through this presentation. First, I wanted to talk about some of the common myths about Latino giving that I've heard over the years. Again, been doing this for many, many years, spoken at a lot of conferences, both live and on webinars. And one of the things I've heard over the years is Latinos are not philanthropic. Well, the last slide just shows you that's just not true. Latinos are typically on the receiving end of philanthropy. While that may be true, it's becoming less and less true. Latinos are a major force in this country. They're a major force of wealth in this country. And they are not only on the receiving end of philanthropy. They're actually very philanthropic, very involved. They own homes. We'll talk about all those type of numbers as I get through this presentation. Latino women tend to stay home and won't give. And again, a myth that's not true. More and more Latino women are out working. More and more Latino women are running single households and working every day and are in the workforce every day. They want to be solicited in their own language. I will say nothing more to that than as I get through this presentation, I will show how that is just not true. It is what we thought traditionally, but it's just not true. And when you see ads now that are being run, even when we're watching TV, you'll see that ads targeted to the Latino market are usually targeted in English or in multiple languages, where you have different generations in the same ad speaking different languages. And we'll delve into that a little bit. And lastly is that Latinos are monolithic. And that could be no further from the truth. Latinos are politically diverse. Latinos are diverse in what they believe in. Depending on what country we come from, our belief systems are different. There are a lot of differences in the Latino market. And so to treat us all as one size fits all is probably not a good strategy moving forward. I've always said over the years in fundraising that segmentation and getting to know your audience is the most important part, because you need to treat the donors with respect. So let's talk a little bit about the power and the influence of the Latino community. In the 2020 census, over 62 million people identified as Hispanic or Latino. The U.S. Latino gross domestic product is calculated at nearly $3 trillion. Now, $3 trillion would make the Latino market, if they were a country, the 5th largest economy in the world. That's what we're missing out on as fundraisers, right? Those of you who are as old as me remember 25 years ago when we were talking about the impending wealth transfer, right? And how important that was. Well, this is the new wealth in this country. And so it's important that we are focusing on this market and that we're talking about this market and that we are reaching out to this market and educating them on the importance of the good work that we do every single day in our nonprofits. Nearly 80% of net new workers between 2020 and 2030 are expected to be Latino workers. So one of the myths as I walked through this and was trying to develop this presentation was, where are the Latinos? And typically we would expect them to be, of course, where? South Florida, New Jersey, New York, maybe Texas, California, but Latinos are everywhere. The Latino population has grown exponentially, and by 2060 will have grown to 112 million Latinos. Kentucky has seen the largest growth overall, believe it or not, one of the largest growths, along with North Dakota and South Dakota, which have seen population growths of 333% and 265% respectively, right? So if you look at this map, the darker blue shades are where the growth is happening, and the other shaded areas, you could see the percent change in Latino population at the bottom there, right? So the big percentage changes are not happening in the places you would traditionally think the Latino market would be going to. And so on a live presentation of this that I made, I was asked, why do you think that is? Why are people moving to North Dakota? Why are Latinos moving to South Dakota? And the reason is because they're moving where the jobs are. They're coming looking for opportunities for their families, looking for a new life, and they're going to where there's new opportunities. And there's a lot of new opportunities in North Dakota, South Dakota, when it comes to farming, the oil business, et cetera, and they are migrating to those areas, right? So the Latino population is pretty much spreading across the country. It's not just in the areas that we have traditionally thought of as Latino markets. Now, obviously, South Florida, or Florida in general now, it used to be just South Florida. California, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania have a lot of the Latino population, but it's now spreading across the country like it hasn't been in years before. So some very fast facts about the Latino population. Like the US population overall, Latinos have been getting older. The median age has increased from 25 in 2000 to 30 today. All right. So the market is getting older. Why that I believe as a fundraiser that's important is because they're going into those prime years in terms of earning and in terms of being able to give to our nonprofits, right? Latinos remain the second youngest racial or ethnic group in the United States. Again, that bodes well for the future. That's why it's important that we educate Latinos on the importance of the good work we're doing for our causes, because it is a market that is young, still young, and and diverse, and I'll get into some of the things that they look at when they make decisions on giving. Latinos are more likely to be born in the United States now than 20 years ago. In 2020, 68% of Latinos were U.S. born, um, compared to 60% in 2000, right? And that number continues to shift and will continue to shift over the next 20 to 30 years. 1/3 of Latinos now report speaking only English at home, only English, up from 1/5 in 2000. So the number of English first homes is going up for a variety of reasons. You know, I'm an example of that, right? I'm Latino. I'm married to an American woman, so we speak English at home, right? And that, as my generation and my kids grow up, that's going to become clearer and clearer and more prevalent in society that it's English speaking first. A greater share of Latinos own a home today, 56%. However, some descendant groups, some South American groups, predominantly Venezuelans, Colombians, are more like, and Cubans are more likely to be homeowners than others. They're closer to the U.S. average, which is in the 60s. All right. But still, the myth that Latinos are not homeowners, when you think of the average population in the United States, somewhere in the neighborhood of 66 to 68%, depending on what survey you look at, own homes that are American first generation, second generation Americans in this country. The number of Latinos owning a home is very similar, very close. And for a generation that's relatively new to this country, it's I would say it's right there, right, with the other groups, and that's going to continue to grow as second generation Latinos and third generation Latinos really become more embedded into society and integrate into society and start living the American dream, which is what our parents sent us here to do, or came here to give us a better life. If fundraisers don't start putting in the time to understand, though, the new nuances of the Latino audience, there'll be no way for them to develop messaging that will resonate within this group. And it's part of the reason that I really started thinking about this topic, because I was also often asked about Latinos in fundraising. And I said, we're just not using the right messaging. We're not educating the Latino market on the importance of these other areas. Going back to my mother's question, and again, I've been doing fundraising for 30 some odd years, and her question is still, and people give, right? And yet she gives every week. And so it's important that we start addressing what it is that they like to give to and why. What are the reasons they give to the church? What are the reasons they send back to their country? So how do we reach them, right? That's a question, again, I'm often asked. 49% of Hispanic adults surveyed reported using TikTok, showing they use the platform at a much higher rate than Black adults, who use it at 39%, Asian adults at 29%, and white adults at 28%. This is Pew Research study. So Latinos tend to use TikTok. So create a TikTok account for your organization. Create videos. There's a United Way that I've worked with that creates great videos. They have a lot of Latinos on their team, and so they'll create videos that are targeted to the Latino market, right, and are funny and are trying to get the attention of the Latino market in the community. Latinos are a bit more likely than whites to have a cell phone and no landline. 47% of Latinos lived in a cell phone only household, compared to 38% of Blacks and 30% of whites. And I found that to be an interesting statistic, because I haven't had a home line in a long time myself. So the way to reach them is their cell phones, right? And the beauty of that is that we're carrying around a phone nowadays that allows us to reach people through social media, through the phone, through text, through email. I'm often asked, well, what methodology should we use? What channel should we use? And I always say all of them. We have an opportunity today that we didn't have 30 years ago to be able to reach the donors in different ways. And I'm not just talking for solicitation. We have to make sure we're stewarding the donor. We're creating a relationship with the donor. We're educating the donor. Again, going back to treating the donor with respect. 55% of cell-owning Latinos text message. Again, that's slightly higher than the general population, believe it or not, because the older generation doesn't text as much. 27% of cell-owning Latinos send and receive email. And that's typically higher, again, than the rest of the population. And the studies have found that it's because they're less likely to own a home computer than some of the other groups. So they're relying on their phone for email, for sending emails and receiving emails. 70% of Hispanics over the age of 5 speak English proficiently, compared to 65% in 2010. So that group of people who are Latinos who are speaking English proficiently continues to grow. For any fundraiser that's still in the assumption that a direct translation, in fact, I just had a conversation with a client about this past week, of their English language campaigns, it was for a capital campaign, not for a calling campaign, would be sufficient to target this audience. The strategy needs to change, right? So, I mean, for them, for example, just so that I could give an anecdotal example, we're talking about the name of a capital campaign, right? What they should name the capital campaign. They're in a predominantly Latino market, and they were talking about giving it a Spanish name and putting all the materials for the Latino community in Spanish. And I suggested that they find a name that was going to be relevant to both, right? Advancing Hope and then having it in Spanish as well, right? Was one of the things we kind of threw out there for a campaign name, you know. Avanzando la Esperanza, for those of you who speak Spanish in the audience today, right? But simply translating everything is not going to work. Latinos and Hispanics are a fairly young demographic. More than 60% are under the age of 35. The Latino population as a whole tends to be way more tech savvy. Hispanics are 29% more likely to own an internet-enabled device than the rest of the population. Again, that goes back to the fact that they're less likely to have a home computer or PC at home. They also spend more time on social media and streaming platforms. So fundraisers would be wise to consider a digital approach. I'm not saying only a digital approach, but a digital approach to their Latino and Hispanic outreach. It's an important part of it, right? Getting them to like your social media posts, getting them to follow you on social media, creating that TikTok account that I suggested, having other Latinos post things on their social media, right, and tell their story as to why they give to the organization, why it's so important to them, right? It's that old peer-to-peer solicitation. So you want to get volunteers you have or donors that you have that are Latinos who are willing to post their stories on social media, on Instagram, on Facebook, so that you could start attracting that, right? Create birthday fundraisers and have Latinos share that with their network on social media, right? So it's important that we keep in mind that they are on social media more so than other groups. Overall, 78% of Hispanics say they prefer English when interacting with digital devices. Again, going back to my mom, right? I tell my mom all the time, and she speaks English, right? But Spanish is her first language, and she speaks English with a broken accent, as most Latina moms do, or a lot of Latina moms do, at least in my generation still. And so I've told her I could take your iPhone and just have everything translated to Spanish, right? So that it's easier for you. And well, that was the worst thing I could tell my mom. She's like, I'm in America. I can speak English. I don't need this translated. So even anecdotally with my mom, I found her very insulted that I wanted to make her life easier by switching her iPhone to Spanish, right? So that it was easier for her to get through the different prompts. Truthfully, I was trying to make my life easier too. Given that simply relying on Spanish language online offerings is insufficient. It often goes against what Latinos and Hispanics want. In fact, according to Global Web Index, research that was cited, 95%, 95% of English first US Hispanics prefer English when using digital devices. 70% of bilingual US Hispanics prefer English, and more than half of Spanish first US Hispanics prefer English. All right. So it's important to understand that translating the documents may actually have the reverse effect that you want, right? Um, for those of you who remember the movie Selena, there is a part in that movie, and if you don't go watch it, it's a great movie, right? But there's a part in that movie where Selena says that the reason she didn't speak English is because her father, who was of Mexican descent, told her she needed to be more American than the Americans. And there's a lot of truth to that in the Latino culture. Again, because our parents came here to give us a better life, right? And so they felt it was important that we assimilate, that we integrate, that we build businesses. And so there's a lot of truth in that line in the movie. And that's why Selena, for those of you who don't know, actually did not speak Spanish. She sung in Spanish, but she did not speak Spanish. So I usually put this line at the beginning of all of my presentations. For those of you who have heard one of my presentations in the past, I usually started off with this line because I think it's so important, and it's one that I've been preaching for many years as a consultant and as someone in the fundraising industry, and when I speak on fundraising. And that's that donor loyalty is not about the donor being loyal to us. It's about us being loyal to the donor. We've spent years talking about donor loyalty, but I think sometimes we lose track in the fact that we need to be loyal to the donor. And that means reaching out to the donor the way they want to be reached out to. That means stewarding the donor, cultivating the relationship, taking the time to have conversations with the donors about what motivated them to give. Why is giving to your cause so important to them? In fact, one of the things that during the pandemic, I suggested to many of my clients who were at home, there was a lot of time that they had at that time. They were just getting into this remote working environment. I said, what should we do? I said, take 5 donors every single day, mid-level donors who you would never have had the chance to reach because they weren't on your radar for major gifts, so you don't typically talk to them. Call 5 of those donors every day and thank them and ask them how they're doing. Don't solicit them, thank them. I called it 5 by 10, and I still encourage that in all my other webinars, right? So again, I always say if you could take one thing out of a presentation that I make, this is a good one, right? So my clients started doing that. They started at 9 a.m. every day, calling 5 donors they'd never spoken to thank them for giving and ask them how they're doing. The net result of that is they started getting unsolicited $10,000 checks from previous $250 and $500 donors that they were calling and thanking. All right. But one of the I knew that was going to happen, right? As a fundraiser, I knew proper cultivation and building relationships was going to yield you more dollars, right? That's common in what we do. The unintended circumstance of what I told them, and if I'm being honest, I didn't even intend that circumstance, was that I've had so many clients post-pandemic that have continued to do it. And they've continued to do it because they've said, Anthony, what it did for me was every morning, it gave me the energy to go on with my day. I used to get so lost in my day that I lost sight of why we were doing what we did. And talking to those donors in the morning gave me a renewed excitement every single day and a passion for why I needed to continue doing what it is that I do. Because those donors were telling me why they gave. They were telling me stories about why they gave. So many have continued to do it. And I mean, typically you're calling 5 donors between 9 and 10, you may reach 1 or 2. By the end of the week, you've spoken to 10 donors and thanked them, right? What a great thing that is. So donor loyalty is important, and donor loyalty means treating the donor the way they want to be treated, not the way that it's easy for us to treat them, right? And so let's talk a little bit about that. First thing, you may have noticed that the title of my presentation has Latinx in it. And I'm going to tell you a little story about why that is as a Latino, that it has Latinx in there. It has Latinx in there because when I was asked by AFP International to make this presentation at their conference, their national conference, I sent them a presentation that said the influence and trends on the Latino market, and they changed it to Latinx. And so it got me curious, right? Because I've never referred to myself as Latinx. My parents have never referred to themselves as Latinx. None of my friends have ever referred to themselves as Latinx. So I got curious. I said, well, let's explore this a little bit, right? And only 3% of Hispanics use the term Latinx. 76% of them have never heard of it. Okay. So this is an angry Latino mom. And for those of you who are Latino, you know you don't want to get a Latino mom angry, right? 76% have never heard of it. So let's delve a little deeper into it. A 2023 survey of 800 registered voters of Latin American descent showed that only 2% described themselves as Latinx. Only 2%. The same poll showed that 68% prefer Hispanic and 21% favor Latino. A whopping 40% found the word Latinx offensive. So if we're using the word Latinx in our solicitations, in our vocabulary, when we are soliciting or speaking to our Latino or Hispanic donors, we've got to stop because it is offensive to a large group of Latinos. And this last bullet is from me, right? Because as I started delving into these numbers and trying to take a look at where this comes from, this Latinx, I found the irony in it is that we started using the term Latinx to try to be inclusive. The irony is that we have taken a word that is Hispanic and Latino and replaced it with an American word that we've made up, right? To try to be inclusive and taken away from the Latino market by doing it. Replaced it with an English word. Keep that in mind when you're using that term, right? And here are some of the numbers you'll see on your screen on the survey that was also done by Pew Research. And this was conducted a little further back in 2019. So that's why I looked up some more recent surveys and gave you some results from 2023. But the numbers have remained pretty consistent over those years. Anecdotally, I could tell you that, you know, I don't identify as Latinx. Nobody in my sphere of Latino friends or family refer to themselves as Latinx. And when I asked my mother if she knew what Latinx was, she goes, "What's that?" Right? So there will be a point, likely, as the new generation, Z Gen, right, starts assimilating, where they might identify more as Latinx, right, because they've grown up with those terms and some more inclusive language. But certainly, the older generation, and with Latinos, when I mean older generation, I mean 30 plus, are not going to identify as Latinx in any way. The differences between Hispanic and Latino. Most people, again, don't know there's a difference between Hispanics and Latinos. Hispanics are Spanish-speaking people from Spanish-speaking countries are Hispanic. It refers to the language spoken. Latino are people from Latin America, including Central America, South America, and the Caribbean. It focuses on geography or where someone comes from. I know that a lot of the times we use it interchangeably. You know, I usually, you know, refer to myself as Hispanic, right? I come from a Spanish-speaking country, but really, I take no offense to either. Most Latinos and Hispanics don't take offense to either one of these terms, but there is a distinct difference between the two terms, depending on where you are geographically and whether you're dealing with people who come from Spanish-speaking countries or people that come from Central America. Some, for example, even Brazilians would be considered Latino. All right, under the definition of Latino, even though they speak Portuguese. So some of the top areas where Latinos want to support, right? Religious congregations is number one. That's obvious from my first or second slide in the presentation. They give to religion all the time. They give to organizations that help religion in some way. Number two is food, shelter, and basic necessities, which I think piggybacks on the religious, right? They're wanting to help other people in need. So that's the second area that Latinos want to support. Number three is healthcare and medical research. And the fourth on the list was education. And with education, it's mostly the higher net worth Latino donors, as opposed to the regular Latino donor that wants to support education. So as I started thinking about these areas, most nonprofits in some way or another touch on one of these areas. It's a matter of how we phrase the case for support, how we frame that case, how we address the case for support, right? In one way or another, our nonprofits are helping people with basic necessities. They're helping better our communities. They're helping in some way to make someone's life better. They're educating people, right? When you think of universities, for example, that are providing opportunity for first-generation students to go to their schools by providing scholarships, that is helping the community. That is helping them be better, right? And I will tell you the number one thing Latinos want, especially the older generation, but I would include me in that older generation now, right? Is for our kids, same thing everyone else wants, to have a better life than we did, right? And so supporting education, supporting healthcare, supporting basic is very important for me personally, right? And it's probably why it's number two on this list, right? Because I think of myself too. These are again done by Pew Research and the Lilly School. But when I looked at these, I think of my own story, right? Single mom growing up dirt poor in an attic apartment with roaches and mice, right? She worked 3 jobs, and so I sit on the board of the Salvation Army, right? Religious, although they help everyone, right? But religious organization, right, who supports people with food insecurity, with housing insecurity, and with basic necessities, and addresses the issues of mental health, which is an important one for these areas, and drug addiction and alcohol addiction, right? So that's why it's near and dear to my heart, right? Because there, but for the grace of God, went I. If my mother didn't work 3 jobs, didn't do everything she could to give us a better life and teach us that we can work our way out of there, right? Some people are not as blessed as I was. And so that's an area that's near and dear to my heart, right? But I also understand that as someone who now has kids that are going to school and going to college, right? The importance of education, because that's what's going to get my kids farther than I was, right? That's what's going to get the next generation of Latinos to the next stage in wealth, in assimilating into the American dream, right? So the top 3 motivations, again, Lilly School, Pew. And I keep mentioning that because it's not on here, and someone asked that to the end of the last presentation. Issues of importance to the community, right? How is this going to help the community? Organizations important to the community, right? And organizations supporting their geographic area. So as you look at how do we frame the case for support, keep these 3 motivations in the front of your mind, right? How are we helping this community? How are we helping this state? How are we helping improve the lives of those people who are less fortunate right here, right? And the motivations for Latinos, ironically, is very similar to the motivations for giving that ZGen have. And I do a whole presentation on generational giving, right? And how to address each generation. And the motives that ZGen usually have is, how are you going to make the world a better place? How does what you do going to make people's lives better in the world, right? The Latino community is saying the same thing, only they're saying in our community, in our state. How are we going to improve that, right? How are we going to make people's lives better? Well, if you're a university, you're going to do it by allowing a first-generation student the opportunity to go to college that might have not had the opportunity. Maybe you have a pantry at the school for students that can't that can't or don't have food, right? And you're doing that. I know many universities I work with and our clients of mine do that, right? If you're a social service agency, it's really easy to frame the case that way, right? You're doing things every day to help people in society. If you're involved in healthcare, you're doing things every day to make patients' lives better so that they can live longer and have more productive lives. So we can all find a way to phrase and frame our cases so that they look at these three, they present these three motivations that Latinos have. And I'll talk about some other motivations and I'll expand on that in a minute. So how does it affect fundraising? Hispanics, Latinos often place a strong emphasis on family, community, and tradition. Those are three very important things to Latinos. So as you're drafting letters, as you're drafting solicitations, as you're looking to go out and make a case, you want to really talk about the family, you want to talk about the community impact, and you want to talk about tradition, right? How to keep that tradition going. Hispanics are 50% more likely to answer their phone than any other demographic. And I could tell you, as somebody who's done telephone outreach for 20 some odd years, and we make hundreds of thousands of calls on behalf of our clients every year, that this is true, not just from the research, but from our research internally, from all the calls that we make. They're 50% more likely. I could also tell you anecdotally that my mom answers every single call she gets, right? A lot of us will look at it nowadays and go, oh, unknown caller, or I don't know this number. She answers every single call she gets and speaks to everybody, right? So I've seen it also firsthand with my mom. Peer-to-peer solicitation. We should be doing that with every group, right? But a personal connection and someone they admire is something the Latino community always talks about when being solicited, right? So if you've got a Latino on your board or a Latino donor that can tell the story, that can draft the letter, right? You interview them, you draft the letter, I'm sorry, but you interview them, get their story, all right? And write a letter over their signature saying, this is why I give back. This is why it's so important to our community that we help this organization. It becomes a peer-to-peer solicitation and something that the Latino community identifies with, right? Going back, why? Because of that sense of family, community, and tradition. That's why it's important. So we want to make sure we have the right person. So those are, as we learned long ago when we entered fundraising, the right person doing the asking to the right person with the right ask amount. Generational marketing. It's important with the Latino community that you treat the Z generation different than you treat the older generation for some of the reasons I've already talked about, right? The Z gen, you want to talk about the impact you're having on the world, how you're making a change in the world, right? For the next generation. That's what they want to hear. They might be more apt to listen to the term Latinx. You certainly want to solicit them only in English, right, at that point. Whereas the older generation, you need to have a more traditional approach with them. Monthly ask amounts. One of the things I recommend to every single client when it comes to Latinos is a monthly ask amount. They are used to giving to the church every week, right? They feel almost a duty to give to the church, those that go to church, right? And so they're used to that habit of giving. And so it's important that you do the same thing with your solicitation, try to get them to become sustainer donors, not just because they're more likely than other groups to agree to that, but also because it gets them into a habit of giving. Now, please make sure you're calling them every year and thanking them for that gift and trying to upgrade them. This is a common mistake that's made by a lot of nonprofits. You know, I sometimes will sign up to give to a nonprofit and I'll give them my credit card and I only get a call when my credit card expires. And at that point, I'm so angry, I have not heard from them that I say, no, I'm not going to continue. So it's important that we're cultivating, we're thanking them, we're constantly saying thank you. It's so easy nowadays with all the tools we've got to send a text, send an email, call once a year, try to get them to upgrade their gift, all right, and thank them regularly. There should be at least 7 touch points throughout the year for a donor, thanking them. Whole other presentation, but I believe it's important, whether it be a birthday call on their birthday or a call to thank them at the beginning of the day. We talked about 5 by 10. Tell stories of community impact and values. Bring them in. Give them a tour. Tell them you'd like them to come in and you'd like them to do a tour. You'd like them to volunteer. You'd like them to be a part in a different way. All right. Crowdfunding. The Latino community is twice as likely to make a gift through crowdfunding and peer solicitations at church or group events, right? So if you don't have a crowdfunding site, it's easy. There's a lot of easy ways to set up a crowdfunding site, and then you can put that out through your social media pages, because they're used to making gifts through crowdfunding in large part because they make gifts sometimes back home or to some catastrophe that happened at home or weather incident at home through crowdfunding, right? So they're used to using crowdfunding and giving through crowdfunding. Church, perhaps you can get the local church to allow you to come in and talk about your nonprofit at the end of service, right? We've had amazing success asking clients to do that with their local churches. And surprisingly, very many of the churches that they've asked have allowed them to come in once a month and talk about their nonprofit, right? So you don't know until you ask. But if there's a Latino-based church, you want to ask whether you can come in and talk about that, right? A lot of the Latino churches have missionaries from other countries that come in and talk about the need to support people in other countries. So it's something that's not unusual, right, in the Latino-based churches. Giving circles, right? Very important. We have giving circles for a lot of things, whether it be women's giving societies, right? The United Way is very big on that. They have Women United, right? And they bring women together and empower women. And they all give every year a certain amount to belong. This is something that's important to Latinos as well. It's a networking opportunity for them. It's a way for them to get together with peers, right? To learn what other peers are doing. And so nonprofits that have started Latino giving circles have done very well in getting Latinos to come to events, getting them to participate more. And when they're able to really get together with their peers and address some of the issues going on in their communities and find out how the Latinos are dealing with those same issues. The importance of family decisions. Latinos are much more likely to make decisions on giving together as a family unit. So meet the family, go out and meet the family, talk to the family, right? I know, I'm not in a traditional Latino family, but I know I wouldn't make a decision without speaking to my wife, right? And it's very, very true in the Latino community, right? They want to speak to a spouse. They want to speak to their kids sometimes, right? My mom asked me about giving decisions. So very much focused on the family unit. There's a serious need for more executives and board members that are part of the Latino and Hispanic community and understand the community, right? So I encourage you to find donors who might be interested in becoming part of a board or even a donor advisory panel, which is the next bullet on here, right? They don't have time to become a board member. Those donor advisory panels by Latinos and Hispanics could be done on Zoom. Everybody's used to doing things this way nowadays, right? So you can get together a group of Latinos and have your CEO, executive director, whoever it may be, get on that Zoom, thank them, and ask them what's important to them, right? I always say you don't need a consultant. You don't need to come to a webinar to find things out. You can get together with other like-minded organizations across the country and develop your own webinar and Q&As with them, right? And Zoom has afforded us that opportunity. We can do that with the Latino Hispanic market by creating donor advisory panels. Take your donors who are Latino and ask them what motivated them to give. Why do they give? Why do they think other people might give? What's going to motivate other Latinos to give? And make sure that you're recruiting some of those people to your boards and putting them in positions as executives in your organizations, because it's such a growing market that it's important that we get people in these positions that understand the community. So a quick summary here of the things that are important. Familia, family. Highlight the impact of philanthropy on the well-being and future of families. Emphasize how the donations or gifts are going to help families in need or strengthen community bonds. That's what's going to resonate with them. Comunidad, community. Stress the importance of giving back to the community and supporting those in need within the Latino community, because that's going to be a huge motivating factor for Latinos. We're all about helping each other. If you look at predominantly Latino neighborhoods, they tend to have Latino grocery stores, bodegas as we call them. They tend to have Latino shoe stores, Latino clothing stores. We tend to want to support each other. And so you want to emphasize that in your fundraising too. How is it that what you're doing is supporting the Latino community? Solidarity, appeals to solidarity are powerful motivators. Highlight how collective action, how the community together can really create positive change and inspire individuals to get involved. Opportunity, oportunidad. Frame philanthropy as a way to provide opportunity for others. Again, they give to the church because they want to provide opportunities to others. They send back money to their country, billions and billions of dollars sometimes, because they want to help others who are less fortunate. So talk about how important what you do is to the next generation of Latinos, to their kids, right? Why is it so important? Why is it important to upward mobility of Latinos and equality of opportunity for their kids as they grow up? That's going to really resonate with the Latino market. Resilience, acknowledge the strength and resilience of the Latino community. That's something we're all very proud of. The challenges we face. You heard me talk about my mom being my hero, right? And, that story is a story of resilience. It's the fact that my mother came here not speaking the language, was able to work 3 jobs, eventually own a business, and give us all a better life. That's a story of resilience. And you want people to tell those stories of resilience to other Latinos in your appeals. You want a peer-to-peer solicitor who could tell that story. Why your nonprofit is so important in affecting that story. Impacto, the impact, we talked about that your nonprofit is having is important to put in any letter, any appeal. Talk about the heritage. It resonates with the Latino community. Talking or writing to them in the Spanish language will not appeal as much as talking about the importance of preserving the Latino and Hispanic heritage and why it's important to give back to the broader community, with your nonprofit. Gratitude, express gratitude. This should be true with any donor, but especially important with the Latino community, right? They give to the church, every week they're thanked. Every week they are thanked at that church. Every week their peers are thanking them for their gifts. So it's important to make sure that you're taking the time to thank the donor. Thank them for being motivated. Thank them for engaging in philanthropy. Tell them the importance of that and how positive they're giving, what impact their giving is having on that community, right? Going back to the impact and how grateful you are and how grateful the recipients are, right? One of the things I always tell nonprofits is, we have an opportunity to take recipients of the generosity nowadays and have them film on your iPhone, on your Samsung, whatever you have, a testimonial. And you can easily send that to a donor, post it on social media, put it up as a TikTok, and it's a recipient of the generosity saying, thank you. This is how you've changed my life. This is how it makes a difference, right? They do that at churches all the time. You have somebody come up, they give a testimonial. Testimonial. This is how you are all changing my life. We can do the same things in what we do every day by having not donors, recipients of the donations actually tell their story. So some of the takeaways from this that I'd like you to take: family, faith, and community are important for Latino giving decisions and priorities. The causes they want to support include religious congregation, basic needs, health, and education. They want to invest in the next generation. Very important. That whole idea of heritage, that whole idea of the next generation doing better than they did is important. And making sure you're addressing that in everything you do is important. Understanding the central role of family and intergenerational involvement in engaging with Latino communities is critical to best practices with this group. Latinos tend to be very tight-knit. within the family unit and within the friends unit, right? We all talk to each other, right? Um, as I was growing up, we'd play dominoes on Sunday, go to family outings and play dominoes with friends. We'd all get together, several families together. So we're all talking to each other and are very involved with each other. So it's important that we're engaging Latinos that way, and that we're making, most importantly, we're making them feel like part of our family. All right. Because that's very important and central to Latinos and Latino giving. So I always like to tell the story of this Lithuanian who was a marksman who was walking one day through the woods, and he kept coming upon tree after tree after tree where he saw these bullseyes drawn. And then there was an arrow straight in the center of that bullseye. And he just got more and more impressed because he's a marksman. There's no way he'd ever be able to shoot his arrow all the time straight in the middle of that bullseye. So he kept walking. Finally, he comes upon a clearing, and he sees a little boy with a quiver, an arrow, and bow. And he goes, "Little boy, are you the one that's been shooting those arrows on those trees?" Little boy says very proudly, "Well, yes, I have." He goes, "Well, I need to know, how is it that you're such a great marksman that you're able to always hit the bullseye in the middle?" And the little boy looks at him. He goes, "Well, that's easy." He goes, "First I shoot the arrow, and then I draw the bullseye." Okay. And I tell that story because I think a lot of times we get caught up in the day-to-day in what we do and the important work that we do, that we forget to draw the target first and then shoot the arrow. We're just shooting arrows. And hopefully this presentation has given you some definition on how to first draw that target, right? What's important here, and then shoot that arrow. And I hope you're doing that with all of your fundraising activities. I want to thank you for spending the last 50 minutes or so with me. It's been my pleasure to present to you. I hope you picked up one or two things at least out of this presentation. There will be a short survey at the end of this presentation. It's important if you can fill out that survey. I would appreciate it a great deal. Gives us ideas on what worked, what didn't work, what you liked, what you didn't like, and what other presentations to put together in the future. If you like this presentation, we do presentations almost every week. Different folks from our team do presentations of our executive team on different topics. I have several topics from donor stewardship to generational marketing. And so plan giving is one of the topics I do. So if you like this, please come to our website, see when our next webinar will be. I'd love for you to join me. My email address is on the screen. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me directly or call me. I'm happy to answer any questions personally. And I encourage you, if you have any questions, to put them in the question and answer box right now, and I'll stay on for another couple minutes and answer. There is one question, someone who's an art museum. It's not one of the top 4 areas of Latino support. Is there enough overlap? It's interesting. I was asked the same question in a live presentation I made on this topic. And here's my answer to that. And I guess I should incorporate it as part of this presentation. I didn't know what a symphony was or a museum was, right? Until I got into fundraising, right? I was a Newark Street kid. That's how I grew up. Farthest thing from my mind, was it was survival at the time, right? It wasn't an art museum and it wasn't a symphony. That's not the way I grew up, right? That being said, my generation believes it's important for my kids, right, to go to museums and to go to symphonies, because it's all about my kids having a better life than I did. And I know that the culture that you get from that, I know that the connections that you make from that are going to help my kids have a better life than I did and have stronger connections and a stronger network than I did growing up, right? And I think that's the way to phrase it. The other thing to do is to make sure to appeal to that community, right? Go to the schools, right? Go to the schools with programs. I have a client, which is, I can mention their name because they're actually a case study for us, but the Houston Symphony Orchestra is one of our clients. They've done a great job of taking the music of Selena and turning it into classical music and into a pop series. They've appealed to the Latino community with that music and gotten a whole new group of Latinos to come in, right? They've gone out to schools with that music and educated students, Latino students, with that music. They've also created an online presence that's geared to Latinos so that they could see the performances online and become members online, right? And so there are ways that you can go out to the Latino community and talk about the importance of culture, museums, preserving museums for the next generation, right? And the importance of their kids having that opportunity that other kids have, right? That might be more privileged than they are. Another question. So thank you for that question, Holly. I hope that answered your question. Another question, will you be sending the presentation out with the recording? I will. You'll all be receiving a copy of the presentation. I'll also send out the slides for anybody that wants them. Are there any other questions? Again, please fill out that survey. I'd appreciate it a great deal. Thank you for spending the last hour with me. I hope you gathered from this presentation how passionate I am about the Latino community, but also about fundraising. I get to get up every day for the last 30 years and know what I'm doing is having an impact on people's lives. I could think of no better job, and I'm sure you guys can't either. So thank you for being with me today, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you so much.